Now, when you look at the texts in the Bible that have to do with fatherhood, basically there are two kinds. There are kinds that have to do with children, that is, from the child to the father, and there are commands from the father to the child. So when it comes to the children, basically what children are commanded to do is to honor their parents, to not despise the discipline of their parents, to respect their parents. Now, when we say, honor thy father and thy mother, usually we basically interpret that as obey your father and your mother. Now, that is definitely implicit in that command. However, also implicit in that command is that you show due respect to your parents. When the Mosaic Law was given, striking your father or your mother was worthy of death. Also, cursing your father or your mother was worthy of death.
Maybe we should bring back the Mosaic Law. Just kidding.
Which, it just goes to show how seriously honoring your parents, respecting your parents, is to be taken by those who follow God.
Well, I think we need to remember the father role to the children in the Bible is an example of how we should relate to God, right? And so if men would think about this in these terms, how your kids view you and how you interact with them is going to color their view of God himself. How important then are your actions, right? You are having literally a lifelong impact on them relative to their relationship to God. And God intended it that way. He has set up that father-child relationship, God the Father to us, human fathers to their human children. Those reflect one another in a lot of ways. Yeah. And so it's a very important relationship, and we can glean a lot from the Bible in how God relates to us as to how we are to relate to our children. Mm-hmm. That being said, there are some very specific things that God tells us in the Bible relative to how we are to treat our children, how we're to discipline our children, how we're to interact with our children, how we're to love and nurture our children. So it's a good guide. People need to look at it, and they don't need to just read it for the sake of knowledge. They need to implement what it says. Mm-hmm,
mm-hmm. And a good question for fathers to ask is, am I conducting myself in a way that is worthy of the honor and respect that my children are commanded to show me, right? Kind of like husbands and their wives. Wives are commanded to submit to their husbands. So the husband needs to ask himself, am I conducting myself in a way that is worthy of submission? Now, whether the father is or not doesn't change the command that's been given to the wife or to the children. But it shows that the responsibility is on the man, the expectation is on the man to live in a way that is worthy of that.
Well, and let me just interject there, because one of the questions we wanted to discuss is, kind of my advice to you on how do you train your children spiritually, right? And you're hitting on the key aspect on how you train your kids spiritually. That's by living out a spiritual life in front of them. Jesus told his disciples, when he washed their feet, he said, I am giving you this example so that you will do the same thing. Paul told Timothy, he said, you need to be an example to other believers. Paul himself said, be a follower of me as I am a follower of Christ. Essentially, throughout the Bible, we're trained to teach by example. We need to be, the old adage, do as I say, not as I do, everybody knows that doesn't work, right? The kids are going to do what you do. We were just telling Hannah the other day, if you want to know what your own attitudes are, what your own language is, what your own tone of voice is, just listen to your kids. They're going to reflect it back to you in near perfection, right? Right. And it's a little scary. As we've already talked about, it's a big responsibility. But that is how we train our kids spiritually. And, we need to look at our own lives as dads and say, am I where I need to be spiritually? Is my relationship to God the Father what it needs to be? Is it going to model to my children what that relationship should look for them? And, it's difficult. I don't want to downplay the fact that it is difficult. It is a big responsibility, but it's well worth it in the end, and it's what your kids need. If you live that out in front of them, they're going to see the importance of it. We need to have spiritual conversations. We've been saying this for years now, right? To train your kids spiritually, beyond being the example, you need to sit down and open the Bible, read the Bible, discuss life events in the context of Scripture over dinner. Talk about what happened at school. Talk about what's happening in the election cycle in the world. Whatever the topic is, make sure that you're discussing it from a spiritual point of view, that you have a biblical worldview in those discussions, and that will help your kids spiritually to develop along the right path.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Am I, in my relationship with God, at an intimacy level such that if my kids were to replicate it exactly, I would have succeeded? I think that's the question that fathers need to ask themselves. It's the question that I'm asking myself now as I prepare for this child coming next May. So that has to do with the way the children are to regard the father. Now, as for commands from the father to the child, fathers are commanded to discipline their children. Now, of course, discipline is the role of both parents. But I believe that the way that we have been created as men with differences in temperament, it is more often than not the case that the man is more temperamentally suited to discipline the child than the woman is. I think that the burden for discipline falls more so on the man. You think of when the mom says to the kid, just wait until your father gets home. A lot of us have heard that before because we just know that there is that's when the hammer is going to fall, right? So...
yeah, and that's not all. It's not always the case. We're painting with a little bit of a broad brush here because I certainly have seen homes when the moms were the enforcers, so to speak, and the dads were, a little too soft. But from a biblical standpoint, I do believe the man should be the ultimate authority in the house, right? Which means he should be the ultimate enforcer of the family rules, right? I've never been an advocate of, wait till your father gets home. I think the mom needs to take responsibility for disciplining their kids then. But I do believe the kids should have a strong respect for the authority of their father, right? He has to earn that. That doesn't come naturally. How does he get there? It's very simple. When he says something, he backs it up. Bottom line, end of the story. If he does that, he will have the respect of his kids. Go put your toys up. There's nothing. Okay, he's issued a command. Go put your toys up. Okay, kids don't do anything. All right. If you don't go put your toys up, I'm going to discipline you. Okay, whatever mode of discipline is in force at that particular time. Okay, 10 minutes later, nothing has happened. I said, pick up those toys or I'm going to discipline you. Okay, nothing happens. The father goes over there and he starts picking up the toys. Okay, wrong, right? That you have just lost the respect of the child because you told them that if they didn't do it, you were going to discipline them. Now you're over there doing it for them, right? And so you're not doing what you said you would do. It's as simple as that. You should stop, discipline the child in whatever mode is appropriate at the time, make them pick up the toys without your assistance. Then they know, hey, what dad says goes. The thing about kids is once you establish that you are in charge and that there will be a negative outcome of discipline if they don't do what they're asked to do, they learn that so quickly. Kids are so quick to learn that, and they will comply. Mm-hmm. Are there going to be kids that are, troubled kids or are more rebellious? Yes. I mean, temperament in kids obviously makes a difference, but it ultimately, once you establish that I am the authority and I will follow through on what I say, the kids know that, and they're going to do that.
Yeah. And it's one of the most loving things that you can do for your child.
Absolutely.
Disciplining kids, it's not fun. It's a sacrifice that you make for the child. Discipline and love are synonymous, and maybe they don't feel that way, because the child is certainly not enjoying it when you're disciplining them. But the Bible is clear that a father loves the son whom he disciplines. This is why we should not be angry with God when he disciplines us, because that is a way that he loves us.